Right, welcome, and thank you for joining GridVest's second webinar in a series that we plan to continue on every month or two, talking about what's going on in the market, in battery storage, and in renewable energy, and all of the fun political changes that are happening in real time. So today I've got some amazing speakers alongside myself to help guide us through this uncertainty and the challenges that battery storage is facing. We're going to be focusing obviously on how to make behind the meter battery storage work today, and it's really focusing on choosing the right battery system and what are all the different variables, factors that are a part of that process. Um, Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. So the webinar will be recorded, so we'll be sharing the recording afterwards, and you can basically, so you don't have to worry about taking notes, but if you want to receive that or share it around, you're welcome to. After the initial presentations from our panelists, we'll have a Q&A conversation. So please use the quick Q&A section of the webinar to share questions. And both the GridVest team and our panelists will try and respond to your questions right away, and also we'll select a few for discussing live as well. And feel free to use the chat to say hello, to share your thoughts or respond to what's being shared. We'd love to see what your thoughts are and keep the conversation going. We want this to really be as engaging as possible. So with that, let's dive in. So our first panelist and presenter is Scott Ameduri. He's the co-founder and president of Enerlogics, who focuses on bringing intelligent technology solutions for energy efficiency, demand response, energy supply, carbon renewable power, and facility operations. Scott is instrumental in design and execution of the utility energy efficiency incentive and demand response programs. And Scott is also a GridVest customer, and he's been on our previous panel. So really happy to have Scott here today. He can tell you a little bit more about his work. Next, we have Noah Shulruff, who's the Director of Business Development at ARCO Murray Power Solutions, where he's focused on establishing strategic partnerships for renewable energy, manufacturing, industrial, and multifamily across North America. And he's also a seasoned solar and real estate development professional with strong location strategy and management consulting background. So two really interesting backgrounds and expertise that we've got with us today. And yeah, so with that, I'm excited to dive in. Just a little bit of a preamble about the state of the market. If we could skip ahead here on the slides. But right now, California and Texas are dominating U.S. energy storage markets, right? So a lot of that is utility scale driven, but the fastest growing area is in the behind the meter space and C&I. We obviously, one of the big opportunities right now for battery storage is supporting data centers. And right now, data centers are not slowing down, nor is electrification or EV charging, regardless of what is happening politically. So, in any scenario, battery storage is here to stay and continuing to grow. And as the rates that we've seen here, it's pretty unbelievable, honestly, if you think about where we were a year or two ago and where we are now in 2025. Obviously, there's some headwinds that we can talk about today in terms of new tariffs, in terms of uncertainty around the IRA and tax credits. But I think in any scenario, the equipment has come down in cost. Yes, it's going back up a little bit now, but it's come down enough where the economics make sense. Buildings around the world, especially in the US, are having issues with resiliency. And right now, there's the growth trends in C&I are pretty incredible. So lithium ion is still leading the way in terms of energy storage and specifically LFP, lithium iron phosphate. There are other battery storage and energy storage solutions out there, from lead acid, flywheels, gravity storage. There's heat batteries now. There are all kinds of batteries, and obviously, I think all of them are needed. We just need energy storage of all kinds. But the fact is that LFP technology is right now the cheapest and I would say, most proven option in the market. And so that is really our kind of main focus for today's conversation, and really what GridVest focused on in general in terms of sourcing in the marketplace. So with that, just really quick for context on what we do at GridVest, we are well, you can jump back to the GridVest slide. But basically, for context, we are a distributor, but a new kind of distributor. And so our focus is really on how do we support EPCs, developers, and others sourcing the equipment to actually get the right systems at a good price and allow them to more flexibly pay those systems over time. So, and thank you. So the slides here will show you a little bit more about what we do in terms of how we source and manage the quality assurance. We vet very in-depth vetting process for any partners in terms of batteries, inverters, EMS solutions that we work with. We basically make sure all the logistics get there on time and navigate any challenges through customs, things like that. And the biggest unique value add is that we have our own financing. So we offer flexible payment terms for really, we're open to any credit, right? It's not about how long you've been around. It's more that we're looking at the battery as an asset. And that's something that is very unique in the space. So from there, if you go to the next slide, you just see what we can offer, right? Which is top tier batteries, helping people understand the specific battery options that are out there, giving you more cash on hand, faster financing, and obviously just making it easier. So we'll get to talk a little bit more about how GridVest can help in terms of what to look for in terms of battery sourcing, in terms of the manufacturers and the inverters and the EMS towards the end. But right now, I'm really excited to be able to introduce you to our first panelist, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how to make behind the meter energy storage work, and really about choosing the right battery system and the ways to monetize those systems. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott Ameduri from Enerlogics, who is going to share some insights and learning. And again, please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. And if you have any further opinions as well, or we want conversations real time, you can also use the chat function as well. So Scott,
great. Thanks, Alex.
Up to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And again, a little different than the last webinar we did. We're going to take a little bit more deeper dive into really kind of the developer perspective of how we put together energy storage systems for different facilities, different facility types, and different clients. Next slide. A little bit about us, as Alex indicated, we are a developer of solar energy storage, EV charging, and microgrid type solutions for C&I scale. Again, we're going to focus today on behind the meter projects where we are able to offset what a facility uses from an energy, a power, and a demand perspective. There's a number of use cases we'll talk about, but very different than if we're talking utility scale or front of the meter systems overall. Next slide. Again, a little bit of our experience in the battery world. In the solar world, we have a number of large scale projects that are going up or are in operation right now. Everything from Palmdale School District, where we're adding large scale battery systems for SGIP and for public safety power shutoff resilience, to existing NEM1 solar. We have Performance Food Group, where we're deploying solar and energy storage systems to offset both energy demand and fleet EV charging impacts. All on over to locations like San Francisco Marin Food Bank, where we're providing resiliency and backup power for their food bank in San Rafael. Next slide. Again, kind of level set. Why are people looking at distributed energy today? Really, we're looking at three big drivers across the industry. Number one is a much better awareness of where electricity costs are at. When people see 20–30% rate increases year over year, particularly in California, but now increasingly in the East Coast, that sort of forgot about that bill now becomes a material impact. So that awareness, number one, helps, and number two, having cost predictability gives a much better business driver for solar energy storage solutions. Two is we look at sustainability goals. Again, energy from a solar system is offsetting ESG or offsetting otherwise produced grid power. Batteries help you kind of mitigate that impact even further. And then lastly, we're looking at tax credits. We are starting generally at 30% based investment tax credit on projects, and then layering in more and more things like domestic content, energy community, and low income community. Again, presuming that the IRA does not get repealed. We'll talk about that some other time. That's a much longer conversation. But right now, all the tax credits are here to stay. Next slide. When we look at energy storage, really the issue is, or the question is, how do you drive enough value coming from that battery? Very often we see customers ask about batteries, and when we look at the value stacking, it doesn't necessarily pay off, and at certain markets where it does. So we're looking at things that are sort of broadly three broad categories. One is cost savings, based on your utility tariff. Can we save you on demand cost or time of use cost? The second big area is revenue generation. If you're in a market that has a liquid energy market, PJM, MISO, portions of CAISO, there are things like demand response and frequency regulation where you can actually earn revenue from that battery. So not just savings on your bill, but actually getting cash back for performing or having that battery system perform in the market. And then the third broad category is looking at resiliency and power quality. That's where we're providing backup power for generally critical load, not for a whole facility, on a location where it might have, public safety power shutoffs that are multi-day, or might have even shorter duration outages that we want to let a facility ride through. Next slide. More examples of this, and again, this kind of gets really much into the heart of how we start addressing facilities. Really have to understand that use case. So if we take any one of these categories, let's take arbitrage as an example. That's really looking at where you have time of use based energy charges, where you can charge that battery during off-peak hours, discharge it during on or super peak periods. California is a good example of that. With all the investor-owned utilities, you're able to look at a peak off-peak spread that's 20, 30 cents a kilowatt hour, an off-peak of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, an on-peak of 40 cents a kilowatt hour. That's a material driver to be able to play this arbitrage game in those kind of markets. Generally outside of California, there aren't as many time of use plans, but you do get into similar systems like real-time pricing. We do have some industrial customers that are on full day ahead or full real-time LMP exposure in PJM as an example, and being able to mitigate the cost impacts and not impact your operations is very material for those folks. Kind of top line, looking at demand management, that's pretty much every market. Every market has some level of peak demand charges that are on the tariffs. How much you can impact that really is really based on what that demand window looks like. Is that demand set on a noon to 5? Is it set on a 4 to 9 p.m.? That really kind of impacts what you can do from an energy perspective and from a demand perspective. Next slide. Again, as we dive into the process, sorry for the busy slide here, but really the second thing is understand what that facility looks like and what does that usage profile look like. As an example, a commercial office building would be more of a bell-shaped curve where you have, as the building gets occupied in the morning, you have an increase in energy usage kind of topping out noon, 1 o'clock, and then you'll see a decrease later in the day. Again, that's generally the shape that we look at from a commercial office building. A K through 12 school might be similar, but different hours. Whereas if you compare it to a data center where it's relatively flat load, or an industrial process that has a variable load that matches your production output, it really depends on what that looks like, on how you can do it. But we're looking for kind of two things. What does that pattern look like over time? And how predictable is that pattern? The more predictable it is, the more we can reliably use energy storage to address demand, energy, et cetera. So again, having that AI learning model to be able to understand what your typical usage profile is helps you kind of address that from a battery perspective. The second thing we look at is what the facility operations are like. As an example, if we have things like EV charging, that can have a short-term impact on the usage profile. We also want to know how the operations are. So as an example, a 24/5 or 5-day a week, 24 hours for those 5 days operation may be very different usage pattern than a 2-shift, 7-day a week operation. And understanding that and what the tariff looks like are very important. And then again, the last thing we're looking at is what that utility tariff or what that utility bill schedule looks like. Every utility has multiple bill schedules, so you have to know what rate schedule that facility's on. But understanding what that utility tariff looks like will help you kind of address where that goes. As an example, in California, in particular, almost every IOU or every investor-owned utility lets you switch to different tariffs when you are going from sort of non-storage to adding storage. Option S is the typical scenario in PG&E. And being able to look at that impact and what that means from a demand and cost perspective is very material to understanding what this looks like overall. Next slide. Third step really is kind of getting into the heart of this. We typically use facility interval data, either actual data or estimating, pair with some modeling tools. I've seen everything from spreadsheets to energy toolbase to really kind of baseline that energy facility consumption. What we want to do is shadow calculate what a bill looks like based on the current costs on that existing utility tariff or that existing utility rate structure. Then we're going to start to look at iterating against different energy storage options against it. Again, we're typically sizing energy storage relative to the facility peak demand. You know, adding a megawatt of battery, a 1 megawatt, 4 megawatt hour to a system that has only 0.25 or 250 kilowatts really doesn't make economic sense. We want to kind of right size that out and look at a mix of what that peak demand is, the megawatt rating of that or the kilowatt rating of that system, and then how many hours are we really trying to address with that battery. 2 hours, 4 hours is the typical scenario we're looking at with lithium-ion solutions. Third step, we're looking at that kind of net of solar and net of solar plus storage to really look at the cost effectiveness. If this is a greenfield design, we're going to look at the impact of solar by itself, and then we're going to look at what the impact of solar plus storage is on bill reduction. Again, varies heavily by market on what that impact could be. As an example, in California, under NEM 3, very often the exported value of any solar, if you're overproducing relative to their consumption, is so invaluable right now that batteries make a lot more economic sense, or you right size the solar a bit more. And then we typically iterate on that design concepts, looking at sort of a worst case, best case, middle of the road case, and looking at different scenarios around that to refine that. The biggest thing is having a good sense of what the installation costs look like throughout this. So install cost of solar, install cost of storage lets you iterate this much faster. And we have to look at things like the impact of the investment tax credit, bonus ITCs, et cetera. Next slide. Taking some real examples here. This is a Midwest water treatment plant on the DTE D11 rate. As you see on the right, top right is the energy tool base, a snapshot of what that tariff looks like. On-peak imports are at almost $17 a kilowatt a month. It's a material driver for this facility to look at how do they address that demand charge. Again, if this was sort of unlimited budget, we probably would put a larger battery system in there. But they wanted to kind of learn about having battery technology on their facility, and it gave us the ability to do it with a relatively small system, a 250 kilowatt, 500 kilowatt hour class system that we're doing there. The bottom right, and you'll see this on the next slide, so I'll walk through it, looks at what that usage profile looks like on the case of this one, which is the solar plus storage. So dark blue background is what the facility load profile looks like, or how much they're using on energy left to right from midnight to midnight on a specific day in June. Green is what solar is producing. Tan on the bottom right picture is what's going on with the battery. So positive or above zero means we're discharging the battery, we're offsetting peak load. Below zero, negative, means we're recharging the battery. But you can see, and this is a use case where we're basically kind of leveling out the peaks and valleys of the solar production and able to recharge that battery in the non-peak periods after 7 p.m. in this case. Next slide. In contrast, California food distributor, Performance Food Group, that we're working with is on the PG&E B19 rate. Very different rate structure. It has two main components that are highlighted there in red. One is the demand charges, a little later, $11 per kilowatt per month. But more importantly, they have a big spread on their on-peak, part-peak, and off-peak tariffs. So S for summer, but in the summer season, the spread between on-peak and off-peak is almost 24 cents, between the 41 cents to the 16 cents off-peak. That gives us a great opportunity to mitigate the higher cost periods by using solar, or using stored solar and using stored grid power in those later periods. Again, recall in California, for those of you that don't know, peak periods in California are now 4 to 9 p.m. If you can see, that's right about the time that solar production falls off. So that green line starts to go towards zero. We really need batteries to be able to address those peak periods in that later evening periods. And again, that's where we are seeing lots of value for batteries, particular for relatively flat load. You can see the dark blue in the background of the photos or the images on the right. It's a relatively flat usage profile. It's cold storage, so it's running chillers and things like that, keeping food cold. Again, it's a very good use case for us on this one, but very different sets of economics as we look at the Midwest versus, say, a California location. Next slide. Again, really takeaways for everybody. It's as much art as science, but once you get better at it, it's less art and more science. But once you kind of have a sense of sizing, you start to figure out what this looks like, and really kind of in comfort level with those installed costs, lets you really run those alternative scenarios pretty quickly. When we look at the design levers, really we're kind of looking at 4 different things. How big is your solar system? Larger solar means more export. Look at your NEM impacts and look at its battery sizing around that. The energy storage system size and duration, the kilowatts and the kilowatt hours are important. Installed cost of both, including ability to obtain domestic content incentives is important. And then, like I said earlier, look at rate switches if those are available to you. So if there's different rate schedules that are available that you can switch to, that may result in more net savings for a customer that makes it even more feasible. Our goal always is to get quick customer buy-in on the analytics and the process. Our approach is really much to be educational with our customers, guiding them through 2 or 3 different alternatives, and then really kind of get a sense of their budget and availability. And that's been our factor in making this a much more consultative sale. Next slide. I think that was it. Yep.
Great.
No
Well, thank you,
questions, right?
Scott. Yeah, I think we've had a few questions that have come in, but most of them have been answered direct. So yeah, really excited to, this was a great presentation. And I think the main takeaway, just really, I think the main notes that I have are really around the importance of understanding your use case for the battery storage system up front, right? In terms of how are you really going to make the economics work, looking at the different pros and cons, and also, looking at it as a full package so you can actually provide a proper economic analysis to your end user, or if you are the end user, to your own project. And yeah, I think what we have next coming up with Noah is going to be really more of a deep dive in a specific area for monetizing battery storage and frequency regulation, something I'm really excited to hear more about, because it is it's a new opportunity that a lot of battery storage projects aren't taking advantage of yet, and there's only a few markets really where it's possible in the US, but I think it's coming. And Noah Shulruff will give us a little bit of a deeper dive on that. And so, Noah, I'm going to hand it over to you, and basically, yeah, excited to learn more about frequency regulation and how we can understand and embrace this new world.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate being here, and excited to speak with you all about an emerging trend within batteries, frequency regulation. I think, next slide, please. So before I get deep into frequency regulation and how it can help with making the economics on your use cases sometimes a little better, sometimes substantially better, I'm going to quickly introduce who I am and who we are. I'm with ARCO Murray Power Solutions. We are a national EPC that focuses on a variety of power solutions in solar, battery, microgrids, substations, procurement, design. Across the spectrum, we have a large team of engineers in-house, which really drives how we do things, which helps with our procurement, which helps with understanding project needs and the best way to help put a project together. And a big new tool that we've had in our toolkit is frequency regulation, which is going to be the focus of this presentation. Next slide, please. So with frequency regulation, one of main partners that we work with is called Intelligent Generation. They utilize the software that helps control the frequency regulation system, as well as other parts of the battery. If you could scroll down, please. So frequency regulation, as Alex mentioned, is a growing emerging trend in batteries. And it's not available nationwide, as he said, but it is coming, I believe. And the map on the bottom right shows, in dark green, shows the areas where Intelligent Generation operates on the frequency regulation front, and light green, it shows where it's possible. It's mostly in MISO and PJM. So when thinking about trying to qualify your projects, it's first thing is kind of look at the map and see if it's a good candidate, and then we'll talk through some of the other factors to consider. Next slide, please. So Scott did a wonderful job of explaining the various ways that batteries can help make a solar project make better financial sense. Here's an overview of the different categories. Here's why batteries are becoming such a large part of the renewable energy industry and why they're projected to skyrocket. There's a ton of ways that you can save money. And on the top right, here's an example bill. You can see there's a ton of different components and various ways that batteries can help tackle each of those different components. On the bottom right, kind of visualizes the impact that batteries can have on a project. So the dark gray area shows the difference between how much load consumption there is before solar and after solar. So without solar, it's the green, and essentially the gray is the delta that shows how much the solar is reducing your load consumption, which it makes a difference, right? It benefits the project, of course. But if you look at the blue, you really see that shows how much additional load offset there is by utilizing the battery. And you can see that is much larger than the gray section, kind of speaking to how impactful these batteries can be. And on the left, it shows the different ways that it can be impactful. Now, all of these areas on batteries, all these different sections of the electric bill, that's why we're implementing batteries. But there's the new trend of frequency regulation, essentially can combine all of these different cost-saving mechanisms automatically. So by installing the software, the software automatically will determine the highest and best use of the battery at any given time. The battery can only do one thing at a time, but the software that you can use when working with these vendors automatically determines what is the highest and best use of that battery, which is pretty impactful. Next slide, please. So this shows how the frequency regulation system, where it fits into the battery ecosystem, which it flows into the battery management system. But I'm going to explain briefly kind of what frequency regulation is and how it works. So frequency regulation is a way, can we get the next slide, please? Frequency regulation is a way to balance the grid, to keep it and maintain it at 60 hertz, make sure it's at the right frequency. Sometimes the grid needs to discharge energy, and sometimes it needs to receive energy to stay balanced at that right frequency. Previously, fossil assets like coal and gas were often used to help keep the grid balanced. A lot of those assets have been retired, and so they're now utilizing batteries and renewable energy solutions as a way to help with maintaining that grid and how to keep it in balance. The grid will essentially release pricing every 2 seconds to say how much it'll pay for someone to either take on energy or to receive energy. And the software is able to respond to it kind of like a high frequency trader, but for energy in real time to essentially determine what you should be using the battery for. Should you receive energy? Should you discharge energy? Should you be doing demand shaving, right? So it automatically is determining the best use of that battery. And the frequency regulation is often the best use case of that. And it drives a lot of revenue on these types of projects. As we've kind of ventured into a new rung on the solar coaster with these tariffs, I think it's important to adapt. And a good way to be able to do that, to be able to make projects still pencil while navigating the higher costs, is using every tool in your toolkit. And frequency regulation can help with making projects, maybe the costs are higher, but the revenue that frequency regulation can bring in can largely offset that. And to give, depending on the project, of course. Now, the chart here, it shows how efficient the frequency regulation software is at responding to the signals administered by the grid. If it looks like it's one line, that's because it almost is. The green is the grid sending its signals as to what it wants you to do. Does it want you to discharge energy? Does it want you to receive energy? And the blue is how closely the frequency regulation participants are able to respond to those signals. So you can see it's an incredibly efficient market. Next slide, please. Now, despite frequency regulation being relatively newer to the market, there is pretty extensive data on the pricing of how the pricing that you receive for participating. So there's a lot of variables on this chart, but you can see that they're largely correlated. And this is showing how much you get per megawatt per hour while participating in the frequency regulation market. And with 12 years of data, you're able to, there's a lot of backward-facing data that you can use as part of your pro forma if you're the one owning the project, developing it, which it's helpful where you can determine what comfort level do you have with using extensive data to make your assumptions moving forward. And, for example, we had a project that we recently completed that we'll talk about in a moment, that we discounted the 11-year average, it was 11 years at that time, by 20%. And we felt comfortable that moving forward, we thought it's unlikely that by and large, this is going to drop 20% for the duration of our project. You can use whatever assumption you like. So that's kind of backwards looking. Now, it also is highly correlated with gas futures. And so that's kind of a forward-looking projection that can also help you with your pro forma to help make a pretty grounded financial analysis as you think through your projects moving forward. Next slide, please. So here's the case study that we recently implemented frequency regulation and roof mount solar. So this was an office headquarters for ARCO Murray. We had a 231 kilowatt solar system and a 530 kW battery. The battery's main purpose was to participate in the frequency regulation market because it's been quite lucrative. And the returns on it have been, it's newer. So I guess we'll report back perhaps on a future webinar, or feel free to reach out if you're curious. But the returns are projected to be quite high. 32% IRR, 2.5 equity multiplier, 2.7-year payback period, actually might be a little lower, as well as the environmental benefit that this has had. But something that I want to call out on these types of projects, the revenue can be substantial. I think we're estimating around $5,800 a month on the frequency regulation, and and that doesn't account for the capacity and transmission savings that we're forecasting as well. But the financial benefits are apparent and they're real. Now, to actually get into the frequency regulation market, there's challenges involved. It's, as Alex mentioned, it's newer. There's not that many folks have experience with installing and setting up these systems. And there's nuances that can make it a challenge, such as that you have to incorporate in various points of the project, like the design of there's like a specific SEL meter that you need to be able to register how much the benefit of frequency regulation is having on the project and how the battery is being used. And you need a variety of those components. So there's a procurement part involved. And the installation of it can be a bit stringent because it's a bit newer. And so while we're very excited about this project, there are also challenges involved with getting it set up. And so I'd encourage you to work with an experienced vendor, installer, EPC to make these projects actually come to reality. And I think we've seen the forecast of how much more batteries will be prevalent in the renewable energy space. And I think the frequency regulation part of it will continue to grow, if not a little bit larger now that we're in this kind of new era with the tariffs, because unless you're exiting the renewable energy game, you're going to have to learn to adapt. And that's kind of when newer technologies tend to get adopted faster. And so I think that's going to be the case moving forward. So to recap, frequency regulation, it's exciting. It's a growing trend in battery. And as I mentioned, it helps you with automatically determining your highest and best use case of the battery. So again, I think it's going to be continuing to grow, and it's an important part of the battery world. And it's important that you have good partners involved. Now, that's especially important for the installation. It can be complicated. It's nuanced. So I'd encourage you to find people who have done it before, people who are experienced. And then when you're thinking about, does frequency regulation make sense for you? A good checklist is check the map that we shared. If it's green, it's in consideration. If it's dark green, even better. There's also something that I want to call out on that map. In Illinois, in ComEd territory, the vendor fee for someone like Intelligent Generation can be rebated back to you. So you can get the benefits of frequency regulation without having to pay any vendor cost in ComEd territory. So that's especially a hotspot. It can make sense in other projects. And it's important to underwrite those projects carefully, which I hinted at during the historical data slide, and happy to talk through if you want to speak offline about how you can make those numbers work into your projects. And then you also need to have enough load in the battery. Now, you need enough load on the facility to make the battery work. You need to be able to offset against something. So that's 250 kW in ComEd territory. It's 500 kW in other states. And then your facility needs to have a high annual electricity expense. So while frequency regulation is awesome, it's not going to work on every project. And so it's important to qualify your opportunities and make sure that it's a good fit. And a good way to do that is you can reach out to a trusted partner. Maybe that's IG, maybe that's us. We're happy to put you in touch. And things that are important to have to make sure that the projects are a good fit are electric bills and interval data. You can get away with just electric bills, but those are kind of the two main points of data that you would need. Next slide, please. Here's my contact information. Appreciate your guys' time, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Great. Thank
I'm
you.
going to comment
That was
real quick,
awesome.
Alex.
Yeah, go for it, Scott.
Great job. No, I think, one commentary for everybody, and this is, being borne out in many markets as I'm reading the Q&A. As we have a continuation of the all of the above energy strategy, if we get more renewables penetration, we end up with more peakers on the gas plant side. We end up with more behind the meter and front of the meter battery storage systems. All that really drives up more and more demand for these other services, like what used to be filled by spinning reserve, sort of keeping warm standby generators online. So spinning reserve and PJM, frequency regulation, et cetera. All these things are things that were served predominantly with excess capacity from fossil fuel plants. And I think really what we're looking at here is at a grid level, using renewables and battery storage systems to really offset what's otherwise going to be a higher carbon footprint fossil fuel-based generation. So again, I think as we see more penetration of renewables, these get more important. I think the economics get stronger still. And that's being borne out in California and Texas and PJM as well.
Great. Yeah, that's such a good point. We'll dive a little deeper in the Q&A on both of your presentations. I just want to add one final session or section on supplier selection. I think that's something that GridVest has quite a bit of experience on, and just a few final notes there, and then again we'll dive into the Q&A, and so keep the questions coming in. I think we've been able to answer most of them in the Q&A chat, but we'll take some more live if anyone has any questions. So yeah, next slide. So just to talk about what we look for, what we recommend to consider, and also what GridVest considers when we're looking at battery suppliers. There's a lot to consider right now, especially with everything going on with the tariffs. But I think even more than tariffs, which is one factor and oftentimes can be made up for in many ways in terms of, increased cost of system can be made up for by increased monetization on the other side. So that to me is not a big a deal killer as things like permitting and AHJ challenges and new equipment certifications that basically if a battery manufacturer or supplier does not have, can't actually be utilized in that state or in that jurisdiction. So those are the big concerns right now, I think even bigger than what's going on politically, because if you buy a battery system and it doesn't meet all of the local jurisdictional needs, then basically you've got a big hunk of metal that you can't do much with. So again, that's really what we're looking for, and also what we encourage anyone in the market to look at. Obviously, cost is the factor, but I think the cost, luckily, of the equipment, of the systems themselves is coming down. Obviously, in the US, there's going to be a cost increase in the near term due to tariffs, but I think over time that will work its way down with improved efficiency of manufacturing, as well as just scale of deployment. So as the projects get bigger, the dollar per kilowatt hour goes down. So you can also make up your own by increasing the optimization opportunity for battery storage, you can make up the cost increase in tariff quite easily from an economic perspective. Quality of the cells is obviously something we say that's like the bedrock of your whole system. So you've got to look for a really high quality cell manufacturer that has very, very strong track record, uses AI and other tools for quality assurance, and is obviously going to be there to back up their warranty. So the financial health of that manufacturer and that cell manufacturer in particular. Track record of successful projects, that's obvious, but something that you really want to look for. Safety history is another big question mark right now. So just ensuring that, luckily with LFP, that's less of an issue, but still making sure that there aren't any safety history issues. As I mentioned earlier, UL certifications and fire testing, customer support. That's something that people just kind of assume, yeah, of course. But when you can't get on the phone with the manufacturer or the supplier, that's a huge problem. And if they're not going to be there to support the warranty, or they're not going to be there to help you with integration or commissioning questions, it's really, again, makes things complex. So that's a huge thing we look for. Our partners are that's one of the critical elements, is that they're there to support the systems they manufacture. And lastly, that they can support technical design and integration of systems, and working with you to navigate single line diagram questions and engineering questions that sometimes the engineering firms themselves don't know, because a lot of these the manufacturer might actually have a better view of how to design a system, or how to connect a system, or how to integrate with other aspects. So next slide really quick. Just inverters are the same thing, except a few additional things to call out. One is performance and response time. That's a huge question mark when you're looking at these projects. Grid forming capabilities, right? If needed, if you need to do backup power, or if you need to have a microgrid of any kind, you want to consider that. That's a huge question mark. Commissioning support. Commissioning for the inverter is even more important than commissioning for the battery, in my perspective, because that is where there's a lot more setting of tech, like the software settings, A lot more customization is possible, and then integration with your EMS system is crucial. So having a really strong commissioning team is important. Track record, obviously, and all the rest is pretty much the same as batteries. And again, customer support is crucial. And then next slide, really quick, the EMS is the brains of the operation, right? That's the system that is going to help you to optimize your economic opportunities. It's going to help you to optimize your system and keep it safe and allow all of your other systems, whether it's at a building level or other site, to coordinate and be in sync with that, especially if you have solar or generators. And you're managing different loads, and you're in a utility market with a lot of different rate structures, like, for example, California. You really need a strong EMS solution, and making sure that they have the right approvals to be a verified data provider for whatever program or utility network that you're in. For example, being a performance data provider in California for the SCHIP incentives is crucial. And obviously commissioning and integration, same thing. That's another huge part of this. An EMS solution or a company or partner who can really be there to commission and support the projects. And again, the rest is obvious, but those two things are the really big things to keep in mind for EMS solutions. And then next slide, last thing, just to show you kind of how we see, like, if you're out there saying, okay, I need to buy a battery system right now, this is basically how we see the world and what I'm seeing, and that's out there, right? You can go on one end, you can go direct to a manufacturer, you can buy a battery, you can buy an inverter, you can buy an EMS, you can figure out how to integrate them. You can, sign pretty big and lengthy MSAs, master supply agreements or master service agreements. And you can, typically, if you can meet minimum orders, that's an option. But there's a lot of headache, a lot of risk, and a lot of management time involved in that, right? The next step up is you go, the other side, right, which is full turnkey, right? You say, okay, there's some turnkey providers. They can provide a really great solution. The problem is you're going to pay probably typically around 2 times as much. And they're able to only do so many projects at one time. So you're going to be kind of waiting for them, and we're going to be in their queue. So depending on how long it's going to take, they may be, the lead times may not be what you need. And again, the cost oftentimes kills the economics of a project. So the alternative, the next alternative is that you go to a brick and mortar distributor. There's a lot of these, electrical distribution companies out there. They carry a little bit of everything. Good solution if you know exactly what you need, especially for smaller projects. You can get the equipment, and if you can do the rest yourself, great. It's a good solution for especially small products, but they don't really carry custom products. They don't really carry many high voltage solutions like larger battery systems. And typically, again, it can be a quick lead time, but typically the customer support isn't going to be there when you have a question about integration or other forms. So again, GridVest, we see ourselves as a unique kind of piece of the battery storage world. We're only that focused on battery storage systems. We have our own financing, and we make it easier. So provide almost like a turnkey solution, but we're not going to provide the full install like a turnkey provider would. But again, we can help to make it as easy so you can manage that process, and our partners and suppliers are there to support you, and we can be an in-between to make that easier. So anyway, that's just a kind of summary of the battery procurement options that we see them. And next slide. So basically now I'd love to the last thing here, I guess, is really about, if you do want to get started, here's how you get started and what questions we would ask you if you say, okay, I need to buy a battery storage system, right? Questions you need to think about. Do you need to have backup power, or does it need to be a full microgrid? That's a huge cost difference between going from economic opportunity only to I need backup power in the middle, or if you need full microgrid, that's even more intensive and technically challenging. But it's definitely a huge value, and I think microgrid costs are going to come down with better technologies and more integrated systems. What's the system size? Are there any minimum or maximum requirements? Do you need help doing economic modeling? What's the target project completion date? Do you have any? What's the minimum lead time you need? What state or jurisdiction is it in? Which utility? And then obviously, do you need financing, and are any price considerations that we should be aware of, so we can help to find the best solution and work with you to figure out a payment plan that works and align your payments to when you get paid. So anyway, that's where we can start. Feel free to if you scan the QR code, or you can go to gridvest.com/request form and dash form, and you can basically fill out a request form, and we'll get back to you with a quote really quickly. So anyway, now I'm really excited to dive into what we talked about today, and pull this all together. We've got about 10-15 minutes. We might go over a few minutes, so feel free to stick around, or if you have to drop, totally fine. But before we dive in really quick, I just want to see who we have in the room. And so we're going to just do a very, very brief poll. So if everyone could, on your screen there, basically just vote very quickly which role do you fit in here, so we know who we have in the room. And we've got great. We've still got a great number of people stuck around, 79 people, which is awesome. And so, all right. So it's kind of EPCs, developers, suppliers, a few consultants, and some end users. So that's kind of just giving everyone a sense of who's in the room right now. That's great. All right. Thank you for that. And I'm going to share the results so you can see what we have. So EPCs, installers, around 29%, developers, 25%, suppliers, 23%. Okay. So now we're going to just really quickly do one more, which is the main use case for battery storage. So what is the main use case for battery storage system that you're looking at? Are you looking at renewable energy pairing with solar? Are you looking for peak shaving, demand management, backup power and resiliency, microgrids, electric vehicle charging support, decarbonization? What's the big one? So all right, just going to take a few more seconds there. We'll just see. So yeah, most people seem like renewable energy integration pairing with solar is the main use case. Second is peak shaving, demand management, and backup power resiliency. Obviously, not that many doing frequency regulation yet, but I think soon there will be. So
It'll
we'll
change,
have to
Alex.
get a vote. Exactly, we need a vote for you on that. All right, so just going to share the results here. So yeah, mostly renewable energy integration, and then peak shaving and demand management. And then last quick question is going to be about what's your biggest hurdle? So what is the biggest challenge that you have in the space right now? So what's for deploying battery storage? Is it cost? Is it economic, like making economics work for the end customer? Is it permitting issues? Is it which system or equipment, lead time, complexity of the integration?
Where's the all the above answer?
Yeah, all of the above, right? It is probably where we all are, but concerns around the future of the investment tax credit, perhaps. So, all right, we've got some good answers here. And so you can see here, financing, high upfront costs. The biggest is that making economics work for the end user, which is interesting. So that really makes a lot of sense, and I think is very much where frequency regulation can fit in, and all the other topics. And obviously, the one thing going up faster than tariffs are electricity bills. So that is the one thing that we have to our advantage right now. And so with that, we'll dive into the Q&A. We've got some questions here, but just to give maybe quick rebuttal to both of you, Noah or would love to. Scott shared some good comments after your presentation. I'd love to hear. Do you have any quick thoughts for what Scott shared today, or any reflections that you want to I don't know, read back before we dive in?
I just want to emphasize something that I thought was very pertinent, that something that was immaterial, electricity bills, are now having a material impact. And so it's important that we think about it in a different way, and it no longer is kind of irrelevant. And I think that's just kind of that's why this industry is growing so much, and that's why I think batteries will continue to grow, just because it's no longer something that you can ignore. And I think that will impact not just like the renewable energy space. I think it'll start to impact the real estate world. I think they'll start to notice that on their pro formas. And so I think it'll become more adopted in the real estate world moving forward.
Great. Yeah, and I totally agree. So we've got a lot of questions here. Would love to just hear what you guys think is the easiest way today, and based on the poll too, I want to hear if you have any different thoughts. What is the easiest way to make battery storage work economically for an end user or a behind the meter project right now? Would you say, if you had to pick one, would you say it's demand charge management? I mean, that seems to be the one that I think I would guess, but what do you guys think on that? Just if you had to pick one thing that's going to be
Yeah,
the biggest
sure.
economic driver for a project.
High cost electricity, hands down, right? I mean, the more expensive power is, the more we can do. That's why so much is getting done in California and the East Coast, where power prices are very high, compared to the Midwest, where you're pretty much looking at trying to, beat out 10 cents, 11 cents a kilowatt hour delivered power.
Yeah.
Great point. I mean, I'm gonna kind of cheat in that by doing frequency regulation, you can kind of use all of the use cases of the battery. And I guess I'll go more specific. Frequency regulation in ComEd territory, where you can get rebated for the cost of the frequency regulation vendor, is kind of a cheat code where you get to maximize the battery without actually really having to pay for it. So I'm going to cheat and say all of the above by using frequency regulation and the accompanying software partner.
Great. Yep, makes sense. What are the average system sizes you guys are seeing in terms of like for behind the meter battery storage, both in terms like from a kilowatt hour perspective, and a kilowatt perspective, but yeah, anything you can share there, and any trends that you're seeing in terms of where it's going? Is it getting bigger, smaller? What are you seeing?
Most of what I'm seeing is about 0.5 megawatt on the battery front. That's kind of a good sweet spot, at least on the frequency regulation size, and it allows you to get it in without outrageous upfront costs, that it kind of keeps cost controlled, but it's still impactful. In terms of looking ahead, I assume it'll just get bigger as costs rise, as the grid's needs rise, but 0.5 megawatt is kind of what we're seeing a lot on the CNI rooftop solar front.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd echo that. We're typically in that 250 to 500 kilowatt, 2 hour, 4 hour. So, a 500 kilowatt hour to 1 megawatt hour battery is typically what we're deploying. Again, that seems to be the right sweet spot for most, commercial industrial uses as people get used to the technology. I think the other consideration here is a lot of facilities are still space limited. We don't have a lot of physical space for it. So as the density and the cost per kilowatt hour of systems, density increases and the cost per kilowatt hour goes down, I think we're going to see bigger systems start to get deployed more often. But that's still, I think a moving target as we see those cost curves and the density increase.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple questions around frequency regulation, and terms one is around the impact annual cycle limits. Like, how does it affect the amount of cycling that you do on the battery system, which obviously would have some impact on the warranty. That's quite part question. Let's start with that one. The second part of that question is, can you participate in frequency regulation when behind the meter, and how that works? Because I think there's an assumption that it's only a front of meter option.
So when we do frequency regulation, it's behind the meter. So it's actually, we see it more on the behind the meter front. So you definitely can do it behind the meter. So regards to the first question, the answer is not really. You're able to keep the battery between 20 to 80%. So it kind of extends the battery life. So it's not a super inhibitor.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll
Makes
say
sense.
in prior discussions with Intel Gen on their software, part of what you're doing is your nomination may be less than the actual nameplate capacity, so that you're staying within those bounds. You're not over exercising the battery, but that's part of the art of understanding that and what the battery characteristics look like, so that you don't negatively impact the battery life.
Yeah,
Good
makes
point.
sense. We've got some questions around battery supplier, stories, and like, what are some good examples or bad examples? Without naming names, could we maybe just briefly have any positive stories, or could be negative stories around, what experiences you guys have had on working with, what's been something that's like either got you and you were like, oh, I never, that was a huge learning, or it's like, hey, this worked really well, this was so helpful from a manufacturer perspective. And again, not naming names, but any stories that come to mind? So I think there's some curiosity as to like what's out there on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, I'll share just RE plus, right? So anyone that's been to RE plus in the last couple of years has noticed the plethora of battery vendors that are out there. And from our experience, the ones we've had that were non-US based support have been a nightmare. Having US based support is very material, whether that's direct US support or at least some US representatives, or relying on somebody like GridVest. Having a US presence makes it a lot easier. The last thing you want is your field guys trying to get things commissioned at 8 o'clock at night and having to wait 12 to 24 hours for a person in a different country to get back to them. That's a material impact. But for us, US support is definitely a key for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had similar experiences as Scott. The support is key. I mean, we've also had complications with foreign battery vendors. So I think it's important that you have kind of a trust network such as GridVest to help you navigate that. So they've had the experience with these vendors and can help you kind of avoid those sore spots and kind of avoid the horror stories, because they've kind of gone through the battles and vetted them.
Yeah. Yeah, great. I think that's all true. And yeah, it's kind of, it is becoming, more and more of these suppliers are coming up, sometimes people, overnight. And so you do need to, yeah, be careful, as you said, Scott, walk around RE plus, you're like, whoa, that's each year. It's a lot more
There's a lot
names
of
than I
them.
had seen in the past. And I think the good and the bad is there's going to probably be some consolidation happening, which I think means that the best are going to get better, and the ones who aren't so good are going to kind of disappear. So we'll see. And again, that's kind of where we're keeping a close eye on. So in terms of cost or financing, I'd love to hear what you guys are seeing in terms of project financing. So obviously, GridVest, we talk a lot about equipment financing, but what are you seeing on project financing for behind the meter projects in terms of bank lending, in terms of construction financing, in terms of obviously there's a big question mark around tax credits and how that plays out. But what's your gut tell you as to what the next, again, we can't predict the future, but like what are you seeing in terms of financing opportunities, and why are there, last part of that question is, why are there not more investors kind of looking at these projects? Because whether from a debt or an equity perspective, it seems like the economics look really attractive.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think there's go ahead now.
Go ahead, Scott.
I think from an investor perspective, there's two kind of trends, right? If you look at a traditional PPA on solar, it's easy. It's a guaranteed revenue. I think where the value of batteries against that and how you're monetizing the battery under a finance scenario is important. More impactful is understanding how the battery is monetized. We're finding investors that look at contracted revenue in a much more favorable way than even a higher value but uncontracted revenue. So things like frequency regulation, things like capacity charge avoidance, and particularly when you look at shared savings models, it gets to be harder for those investors to get their arms around on. Even with 12 years of operating history and knowing where that's at, that's still something that some investors will discount now significantly enough that makes that finance quite a bit more challenging. So contracted versus non-contracted revenue is the big thing that we see.
Yeah, definitely want to echo that. It's, as much as frequency regulation can create a lot of projected revenue, some lenders do, as Scott exactly mentioned, they view it a little differently. It's helpful to come in with a bunch of data and show the detailed assumptions, which is what we did on the recent case study, of showing it's kind of hard to dispute. Like if you're underwriting that you project your revenue to be like, for example, for when we did 20% under the 11-year history, that was below the lowest point in the 11-year history of it dropping for more than like a day. So coming in with like a very data heavy approach is helpful with those conversations. But I think as more battery projects get put into the market and as more lenders get more familiar, I think they'll ease up a little bit, just because they'll have experience with it and they'll have seen a track record just like other asset classes. But yeah, contracted is kind of key. A strategy that we've seen that is helpful with trying to get projects across if they're not fully on contracted revenue is using the ITCs to essentially pay down a lot of the loan on like the construction loan so that your term loan is significantly lower and it's at a place that the lenders are more comfortable that maybe the solar part of your project can cover the debt service coverage ratio, or maybe the battery and the contracted revenues part of batteries. But you can get creative. I think it depends on your project. I think coming in with a data heavy approach and trying to use your different levers to get the debt to a more manageable level is helpful. But I do think that there are lenders in this space, if you hit their sweet spot on size, you can get more favorable terms than we've been seeing recently. Like, for example, I spoke with a lender yesterday who was talking about, like, if you hit their sweet spot on project size and project type, they're offering 100% LTV. And I hadn't seen that before. So I do think that as the industry, as the field gets a little more seasoned, the financing front will start to become a little more favorable with getting projects across.
Yep, great. All right, well, just a couple more questions here. We're almost wrapped up. But there was an interesting question that came in from Dan Cooney, which was around basically with regards to demand charges and trying to do behind the meter demand charge management. If you miss one 15-minute window, you get penalized. So how do you assure your battery is going to be there all the time? You can't miss if you want to really reduce the demand charges. So curious if you have any thoughts on that. Scott, I know you had already kind of answered that.
I answered some of it
reiterate
online. Right, I'll reiterate. I mean, kind of we're looking at demand charge windows. So there's two kinds of demand charges. There's those that are a set window known ahead of time under a tariff structure that says, let's say noon to 5 p.m. is your peak window or when you're going to be measured against your peak demand. And really you're looking at how do I discharge my battery relative to when my facility is going to peak. That can be done with a combination of on-site real-time metering and some combination of historical data on what your usage profile looks like. On the reverse are ones where, and I think the question is really asking, if I'm looking at something like a 5 CP or a 1 CP where my demand charge is set by when my peak, when the grid peaks, then you're looking at predictability of that grid peaks. And again, you rely typically on historical numbers, but on PGM for a 5 CP, 5 coincident peak, you're looking at the 5 highest days over the course of the year. You might dispatch, I don't know, 20, 25 hours to hit those 5 highest hours of the year. And really, you're kind of looking at how you balance that out. You don't want to over-exercise a battery 100 or 1,000 times or 100 or 1,000 hours and reduce that effectiveness. But you do want to make sure you hit that. So there are a number of providers out there that have good prediction engines on it. And really kind of understanding, their accuracy and hit rate is important to understand what that's going to look like.
Yeah, great. I'll open it. Scott or Noah, do you guys have anything you want to add or question things that are you think would be interesting for the audience, things we haven't hit on yet? Or
yeah, I mean, I'll echo a couple things, and again, I think we're not COVID supply challenges, but we are into a new world of other supply challenges again. Tariffs are going to change this quite a bit. AHJs, particularly fire code, is changing this, and I think the last thing in here is we're still very much in an evolutionary environment in terms of the technology. And what that means is every time there's an iteration of technology, it takes the UL listings and the CEC listings and the fire code and everything else another period of time to catch up. So as an example, in certain counties in California, AHJs are requiring now, or actually fire inspectors are requiring above and beyond UL 9540A testing, large scale fire testing, et cetera. And we're all playing catch up on what that standard eventually will look like. It's not yet a standard, what that test means. And we're finding manufacturers are often saying, hey, we're going to comply as soon as we know what the standard is against it. So again, I think we're very much in this environment where things are evolving really quickly, and you have to be very abreast of it. I think a partner like GridVest that has that visibility across the US and where things are headed is really helpful to really kind of pick the right technology for the right location for the right cost point.
Yeah, well said. Noah, anything you wanted to add on that or other topics?
Yeah, I think Scott raises a great point about the changing climate and the rapid change of technology. I think it's hard to be an expert on all of these different technology solutions and every strategy. And I also think we're going to have to get a little more resourceful and use kind of alternative methods to make projects work. Because I don't think I don't know about you guys, but I don't particularly want to sit on the sidelines until things calm down. That's not really what I'm looking for, and I assume you aren't either. And so as these new technologies emerge, and as kind of it gets a little harder to make projects pencil with rising costs, I think it is prudent to, rather than try to learn every technology and learn how to underwrite it or learn how to install it or learn how to implement it, I think it's helpful to get a good trusted network of partners who specialize on those areas. I think that's a helpful way to not spread yourself too thin as we look for alternative ways to make projects work. So like, Scott obviously is incredibly technically savvy and has a lot of good grasp on this stuff. GridVest does a great job of giving you a trusted network of battery suppliers and financing options. AMPS can help with a variety of solar and battery installations, design, procurement, etc. I think it's helpful to focus on building a trusted network that you can rely on to help you navigate these changes rather than try to do everything on your own, because you'll have growing pains and it might be worth just bypassing some of those to get existing knowledge base.
Great. Yeah, well said, Noah and Scott. You guys clearly know your stuff. I wish we could continue chatting about this, but we're already over time and want to get people back to their busy days and figuring out how to navigate all the uncertainty and changes that are happening in real time. But just know that this group will be here for you, for anyone listening and want to learn more, follow up on this conversation. And just tune in for future webinars that we'll be hosting. We have some other topics coming up on how to the future of EV charging and fast charging and how batteries can support that. Also around data centers and the need for battery storage, and as well as the update on UL certification, fire testing, and some of the new AHJ requirements that are coming. So a lot of interesting topics. Please also reach out if you have an idea for a topic or if you want to even be a panelist for a webinar. We'd love to have you. And we will send the recording as well as contact info for Noah and Scott, and to learn more about Enerlogics and AMPS and ARCO Murray. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panelists, and we'll look forward to a cleaner future and one with battery storage being a primary driver to the future of our energy independence and our utility network, and I think a more decentralized future. So thanks again, everyone, and keep in touch.
Thank you for having me, Alex. It was a pleasure to be with you all.
Yeah, thank you, Noah.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, Scott.
Take care, everyone.
Yep. Bye.